Lost in the snow, the wind was like knives, cutting through Ethan's jacket, no matter how tightly he pulled it around himself. Snow swirled in the air, stinging his face and covering the world in endless white. He had been walking for hours, and his boots were heavy with frozen slush. Each step felt slower than the last, and the storm only grew worse. Ethan's breath came out in clouds, but even that quickly vanished into the blizzard. He checked his wrist scanner again, hoping it would show a human outpost nearby. The screen blinked back at him with a single faint signal: not human. Not familiar, it was deep inside the snow-covered forest, far from the main path. The storm howled around him, but the thought of standing still was worse. If he stopped moving, the cold would take him. There would be nothing left but a frozen body under the snow with heavy steps. He turned toward the signal. The snow crunched under his boots, and branches bent under the weight of white powder above him. The trees here were alien tall, black trunks with glowing blue veins running through their bark. The faint light from them was the only thing keeping him from walking blindly into the dark. Ethan's mind kept repeating one thing: shelter. I just need shelter. Then he saw it, a shadow, small and still, standing in the middle of the snow. At first, he thought it was a trick of his eyes, a lump of ice, or a strange tree shape. But then the figure moved, and two glowing eyes looked straight at him. The shape was small child-sized, and as he came closer, the details became clear. It was a girl, but not human. Her skin was a soft silver blue, and her hair was white as the snow. She wore clothes that seemed far too thin for the weather, patched together with pieces of cloth and leather. Her feet were bare, half buried in the snow. Yet she didn't shiver. Her eyes were large and luminous, almost like a cat's, watching him without fear. Ethan stopped a few feet away, unsure what to say. His first thought was that she might be lost. But there was something about the way she stood, calm, still, almost waiting. Before he could speak, she tilted her head slightly and said, in a soft, strange accent, "Come, before the snow eats you." He blinked. Was that a warning? A threat? Or just a strange way to say, "Come inside"? She didn't wait for his answer. Instead, she turned and walked toward the deeper forest, her steps light in the snow. Ethan hesitated, his mind torn. Follow a mysterious alien child into the unknown, or stay out here and freeze? It wasn't much of a choice. The wind pushed at his back as he followed her. They walked in silence, only the crunch of snow underfoot breaking the stillness. She moved quickly, weaving through the glowing trees as if she knew every root and branch. The storm seemed weaker here, though snow still fell in thick flakes. Finally, she stopped in front of what looked like a mound of snow piled high against a large tree. Ethan thought it was just a drift until she knelt down, brushed away a layer of snow, and revealed a small door. It was made from woven branches and strips of leather, barely tall enough for him to crawl through. She looked back at him with those strange glowing eyes. "In here," she said simply, before slipping inside. Ethan crouched and followed. The moment he was inside, he felt a wave of heat wash over him. The walls were made of packed snow, but strange glowing crystals were embedded in them, giving off both light and warmth. It was a single room, small and low, with a soft pile of furs in one corner and a small pot of steaming liquid over a flat stone. The girl sat cross-legged by the pot, watching him as if deciding whether he was dangerous or not. "You are human," she said, not as a question. "Yes," Ethan replied, still catching his breath. "And you?" She didn't answer. Instead, she picked up a wooden cup, dipped it into the pot, and held it out to him. He hesitated, but the heat and the smell were too tempting. It was sweet, almost like tea, and it warmed his chest instantly. "What's your name?" he asked. "Lyra." She replied quietly. Her voice was soft, But there was something in her eyes, something that made him feel she had seen more than any child should. He wanted to ask her why she was alone, why she was out in the snow with no shoes. But before he could, she looked toward the door. Her expression changing, her ears small, pointed, and delicate twitched slightly. She whispered, almost to herself, "They are moving again." Ethan's heart skipped. "Who?" he asked. She didn't look at him, only reached for a fur blanket and handed it to him. "You can stay until the storm stops." "But not longer," she said. Her tone wasn't unfriendly, but it was firm. Ethan pulled the blanket over his shoulders, feeling the warmth seep in. But now, his mind wasn't just thinking about shelter, it was thinking about her words. They are moving again? Whoever they were, Lyra didn't seem afraid of the snow. She seemed afraid of something else entirely. And Ethan had a sinking feeling that whatever was out there in the storm was getting closer. The little host, the shelter, was small, but every corner felt warm compared to the storm outside. Ethan sat close to the glowing crystals in the wall. Watching how their light shifted between soft blue and pale gold, they looked almost alive, pulsing gently like the heartbeat of the snow itself. He reached out and felt their surface smooth, warm, and dry. It was strange to think something like this could exist naturally on a frozen planet. Lyra moved silently, her small bare feet making no sound against the packed snow floor. She poured more of the steaming drink into his cup without asking. Her movements were careful, almost too careful, as if she had learned to avoid wasting anything. When Ethan thanked her, she only gave a tiny nod. Her glowing eyes fixed on the steam rising from the pot. "You live here alone?" he asked after a long pause, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Sometimes," she replied, and nothing more. Her voice was quiet but steady. It was not the kind of answer a child should give, and it made Ethan's stomach tighten. He looked around the shelter. There were no signs of toys, books, or anything a child might own. Only furs, cooking tools, and bundles of dried food hanging from the walls. It looked more like a survival hideout than a home. He wondered if someone else had built it for her, or if she had made it herself. "You're not afraid of me?" Ethan asked. Breaking the silence again, Lyra's eyes met his, calm and unblinking. "Humans don't scare me," she said. "It's the others you should be afraid of." Her tone was matter-of-fact. Like she was talking about the weather. Ethan leaned forward slightly. "Others?" But she simply shrugged and started tearing small pieces of dried root into the pot, letting the steam carry their earthy smell into the air. The heat from the crystals began to thaw the numbness in Ethan's fingers and toes. He removed his gloves. Rubbing his hands together, outside, the wind screamed, throwing snow against the shelter's entrance. But in here, the only sounds were the faint bubbling of the pot and the soft crunch when Lyra bit into a dried fruit. Ethan studied her again. She couldn't have been more than 10 years old if her species aged like humans, but there was a sharpness in her gaze. She sat like someone who had learned to listen for danger. Someone who slept lightly, ready to run at the smallest noise. It was unsettling. She didn't talk much, yet every word seemed to have weight. "What happens when the storm ends?" Ethan asked. "You leave?" she said simply, "and I stay." Her voice didn't break, but her eyes drifted toward the glowing wall as if she didn't want to meet his. "You don't have anywhere to go." He pressed. Lyra hesitated, then murmured, "Here is safer than out there." Ethan wanted to argue no child should be out here alone in a shelter made of snow, but before he could speak, Lyra suddenly raised her hand, signaling for silence. Her head tilted slightly and her ears twitched again. Ethan held his breath, listening at first. He heard nothing but the muffled storm. Then faint, almost drowned by the wind, there was a sound. A low, slow crunch of footsteps in the snow. Heavy and deliberate, Lyra moved to the entrance quietly. Pressing her ear against the small door, her body was tense, her shoulders stiff. She waited for a few moments before returning to the fire, her face unreadable. "There, far away," she said softly, but not far enough. Ethan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. "Who are they?" he asked again. She didn't answer this time. Instead, she handed him a small fur blanket. "Sleep now," she said. "The storm will keep them away for a while." He lay down reluctantly, his mind still buzzing with questions. Why was she hiding here? Who were these others she kept mentioning? And why did she seem more concerned about them than about being alone in a deadly snowstorm? As he closed his eyes, the warmth of the blanket and the soft glow of the crystals made the shelter feel almost safe. Almost. But the last thing he heard before drifting into uneasy sleep was Lyra's whisper. She came back once. "I don't think she will stop this time." The words made no sense, but they lodged deep in Ethan's mind, and somewhere outside, far beyond the shelter, something moved through the snow, leaving slow, deep footprints behind. The unspoken secret. Shelter was warm, but Ethan's sleep was restless. He kept hearing the storm in his dreams, howling winds, whispering voices, the crunch of snow under unseen feet. Sometimes he thought he heard Lyra's voice too, faint and distant, as if she were calling to someone just beyond the walls. When he woke, the crystals on the walls glowed dimmer, their light pulsing slower. The fire in the pot had died to faint embers, and the air was cooler now. Ethan blinked, adjusting to the half-dark, and realized something was wrong. The pile of furs where Lyra had been sleeping was empty. He sat up quickly, listening. The storm outside had softened, the wind no longer screaming. That was good. News for travel, but bad news for whatever danger she kept hinting at. His eyes drifted to the small leather door, and he noticed it wasn't closed all the way. A thin trail of snow had blown inside. Glittering faintly in the dim light, Ethan pushed himself to his feet, pulling on his gloves and stepping outside. The cold hit him instantly, sharp and biting. After the warmth of the shelter, the snow was still falling, but lightly now, drifting down in slow, lazy flakes. The forest was quiet except for the faint creak of branches, and there just ahead were small footprints leading away from the shelter. They were Lyra's. The steps were light, close together. Weaving between the black-veined trees, she hadn't been running. She was moving carefully, as if she didn't want to be heard. Ethan frowned, glancing back at the shelter. Part of him wanted to stay inside where it was safe, but something about those small prints disappearing into the white made his chest tighten. If something happened to her out there, he'd never forgive himself. He followed, stepping exactly where she had stepped to keep his trail quieter. The glowing veins in the trees pulsed faintly, lighting the way as he went deeper. The air felt heavier. It wasn't colder, was quieter. Too quiet, no wind. No sound of snow falling from branches, just silence. Ethan slowed his breath. Loud in his own ears, after several minutes, he saw her. Lyra was kneeling in the snow beside a large mound. Her hands were digging through the powder, brushing it away in frantic, trembling motions. Ethan approached slowly, not wanting to scare her. When he got closer, he realized the mound wasn't snow, was a body, half buried in white. It was another alien, taller than Lyra, his skin the same silver blue, but darker. He lay still, his face pale and lips tinged with ice blue. His clothes were torn, one side soaked with frozen blood. Ethan knelt beside them, his breath catching. "Who is he?" he asked. Lyra didn't look up. "My brother." "Kale," she said softly, her voice shaking. "He tried to come back to me, but the storm caught him." Ethan felt a rush of urgency. They couldn't stay here. Not with him in this condition. He slipped his arms under Kale's shoulders and legs, lifting him carefully. The alien was lighter than expected, but his body was cold as stone. "Come on," Ethan said. "We have to get him inside." Now Lyra moved quickly beside him, her small hands brushing snow from Cale's face. They made their way back through the trees, Ethan's boots sinking deeper with the added weight. Every few steps, Lyra glanced over her shoulder, her ears twitching as if listening for something once. She stopped entirely and held up her hand for silence. Ethan froze, straining to hear. At first, there was nothing. Then a faint crunch. Heavy, deliberate. From somewhere behind them, "Go." Lyra whispered urgently. Ethan didn't argue. They reached the shelter, and he pushed through the small doorway, laying Cale down on the pile of furs. Lyra immediately began covering him with blankets, rubbing his arms and face to bring warmth back. Ethan grabbed the pot and added more fuel, reigniting the small flame. Soon, steam began to rise. Again, filling the air with the earthy scent of the roots. "Will he be okay?" Ethan asked. Lyra hesitated before answering. "If the storm stays, maybe," she said. "If the storm ends, they will find us." Her voice was flat, like a truth she had accepted long ago. Ethan leaned closer. "Who are they?" Lyra's eyes met his, and for the first time, he saw fear. "They're not just wariness, but real fear. The hunters," she whispered. "They took the rest of my family. Cale hid me here before they could take me too." Ethan's chest tightened. Now it made sense, the way she moved, the way she listened for sounds outside. The reason she lived in a hidden shelter in the snow, she wasn't lost. She was hiding, and if the hunters were still looking for her, this storm was their only shield, as Cale stirred faintly under the blankets. Lyra reached for Ethan's hand without looking at him. Her small fingers were warm now, but trembling. "Please," she said quietly. "Don't leave us." "Not yet." Ethan didn't answer right away, because in that moment, he knew whatever was out there in the white. Whatever was hunting them, he was now part of it, and the storm wouldn't last forever. Footprints in the snow morning came without sunlight. The sky outside was a dull, heavy gray, the kind that pressed down on the world. Snow still drifted lazily from above, but the wild, screaming wind of last night was gone. Ethan woke to the sound of soft movement, the sound of Lyra quietly shifting Cale's blankets, her brother's. Breathing was slow, but steady now. His silver-blue skin warmed slightly by the shelter's heat. Ethan sat up and rubbed his eyes. Lyra noticed and gave him a small nod, but her expression was tense. "The storm is ending," she said simply. Her tone wasn't relief, was warning. "Coo!" Ethan crawled to the entrance and peeked outside. The snow was deep, coming up past his knees, but the air felt calmer. He was about to step back inside when something caught his eye. A set of footprints pressed deep into the snow. Heading toward the shelter, they were not Lyra's, not Cale's, but definitely not his own. The tracks were wide, spaced far apart, each print longer than his entire boot. Ethan's stomach tightened as he followed them with his eyes. They came from the tree line, weaving between the black-veined trunks, and stopped not far from the shelter's mound. From there, the tracks circled, then moved back into the forest, disappearing into the distance. Someone had been here while they slept, close enough to see the shelter, close enough to hear them if they made a sound. Ethan turned back toward Lyra. "Were you outside last night?" She shook her head immediately. "I stayed here," she said, her voice low. Her eyes narrowed when he mentioned the footprints. "They found us," she whispered. Cale stirred at her words, his eyes half opening. His voice was hoarse but urgent. "We have to move before nightfall. They hunt best in the dark." Ethan glanced at Lyra. "You told me the storm keeps them away," he said. "It does," she replied, "but now the storm is gone, and they will come." The three of them ate quickly. Lyra gave Ethan a handful of dried fruit while she and Cale shared the root broth. There was no time for comfort. Ethan helped Cale to his feet, supporting most of his weight. The older alien winced with each step, his wounds still raw, but he didn't complain. They stepped outside into the white world, the snow crunching under their boots. The footprints were still there, and Ethan felt a strange chill crawl up his spine, knowing they had been watched. Cale's gaze followed the tracks into the trees, his jaw tightening. They are testing how close they can get without being seen. He said, next time, they won't stop. The forest felt different now, before. The glowing blue veins in the trees had been strange but almost beautiful. Now they looked like faint warning signs, lighting the way for something else too. Find them, Ethan scanned the shadows between trunks, half expecting to see movement. They moved slowly, following a narrow path between the drifts. Cale's breathing was heavy, and Ethan could feel how much effort it took for him to keep going. Every so often, Lyra would stop, listening, her ears twitching to sounds he couldn't hear. Once, she whispered, "Left side," and they all froze. Ethan turned his head and thought he saw a flicker of movement, dark shape slipping behind a tree. When he blinked, it was gone. The silence pressed in again, broken only by their steps. But after a while, a new sound joined them, a faint crunch, matching their pace. Too far to see, but close enough to feel. Whoever or whatever was following them was in no rush. By midday, they reached a shallow, frozen stream. Cale leaned heavily on Ethan while Lyra scouted ahead, her small frame almost vanishing in the snow. She crouched at the far bank and motioned for them to hurry, when Ethan stepped down into the icy stream bed. He saw wire across the snow. On the other side was a fresh set of prints. Not the ones from before. These were newer, sharper, and coming from the direction they were headed. The hunters were not just behind them, they were ahead too. Where? Surrounded? Ethan muttered. Cale's hand tightened on his arm. They will close the circle by nightfall, he said grimly. They like the fear. They will make us run, then take us when we are too tired to fight. Ethan looked at Lyra, who was watching him closely. We can't outwalk them, he said. No, she agreed, but maybe. We can hide. Her gaze shifted toward a steep slope in the distance, half covered in jagged rocks and twisted trees. Ethan didn't see anything special about it, but Lyra's voice was sure. There are ice caves there, she said, deep ones. They won't follow far inside. With no better option, they turned toward the slope. The footprints around them seemed to multiply the further they went. Sometimes Ethan thought he saw shapes in the trees, tall and thin, moving silently, but whenever he looked straight at them, there was nothing but snow. By the time they reached the base of the slope, Cale was barely conscious. Ethan and Lyra half carried him upward, their boots slipping on the icy ground. The wind picked up again, carrying with it a low, almost human-sounding whistle. But Ethan knew it wasn't the wind, it was a call signal to others that the hunt was closing in, and somewhere behind them, in the pale light, a single long shadow stretched across the snow, far too tall to be human. The hunters that climbed to the ice caves was slow and brutal. Cale's weight leaned heavy on Ethan's shoulder. Every step a battle against slipping on the frozen slope. Lyra moved ahead of them, light and quick despite the snow, her eyes scanning every shadow. The wind carried that same low whistle again, rising and falling like a predator's breath. It made the hair on the back of Ethan's neck stand up. By the time they reached a narrow opening in the rock face, Cale was nearly unconscious. Ethan lowered him gently onto the icy ground, his own muscles aching. Lyra crouched beside her brother, pulling a thin leather pouch from around her neck. She opened it to reveal a small handful of glowing blue seeds. Pressing them into Cale's palm, she whispered something in her language. The seeds gave off a faint heat, and Cale's breathing steadied slightly. Ethan glanced back down the slope. The snowfield below was empty, at least at first glance. But then he saw it. Movement between the trees, slow and deliberate. 1, 2, 3 tall figures, barely visible in the pale light. They didn't rush. They didn't stumble. They moved with the patience of something that knew its prey couldn't escape. Lyra followed his gaze and stiffened. "They're here," she said simply. Her voice didn't tremble, but her fingers gripped the edge of Cale's blanket tightly. The hunters stepped out of the tree line. And now Ethan saw them clearly. Their bodies were long and thin, covered in mottled white and gray patterns that blended into the snow. Their arms hung low, ending in clawed hands with fingers too long for comfort. Each wore a bone mask over their face, carved with narrow slits where eyes should be, but the masks didn't hide the faint glow of something moving underneath. Like hot coals buried in ash, they didn't speak, not with words. Instead, one raised its head slightly and released that same low whistle. From the forest behind them came an answering call. Ethan's stomach twisted. They were signaling each other. "Closing in from multiple sides, we can't fight them," Cale rasped, his voice weak but urgent. "They don't tire, and they don't stop until they have what they came for." Ethan scanned the slope. The cave entrance behind them was narrow, just wide enough for one person at a time. It might be the only thing keeping the hunters from swarming them at once. But it also meant they'd be trapped inside if the creatures blocked the exit. "They want me," Lyra said suddenly. Her voice was flat, not dramatic, just stating a fact. Ethan turned to her sharply. "What do you mean?" "They always want the youngest," she said, her eyes locked on the approaching figures. "They keep us alive." For the trade, Ethan didn't like the sound of that. He stepped in front of her without thinking, putting himself between her and the hunters. "Not happening," he said. His voice was steady, but his heart was pounding hard enough to feel in his throat. The first hunter reached the base of the slope, its clawed hands curling into the snow as it began to climb. It moved like a spider, low, silent, impossibly fast for its size. Ethan grabbed the small flare gun from his belt, the only weapon he had. He aimed and fired. The flare burst in a bright red explosion, the light reflecting off the snow and ice. The hunter flinched back, letting out a shrill, unnatural hiss. Lyra didn't waste the moment inside. She shouted, pulling at Cale's arm. Ethan shoved the flare gun back into his belt and helped drag Cale into the narrow cave entrance. The crystals inside the rock glowed faintly, lighting a twisting tunnel that curved deeper into the mountain. They moved as quickly as they could, but the sound of claws scraping against stone echoed behind them. The hunters were following. Their long arms reached into the tunnel, scraping at the walls as they pulled themselves forward. Ethan turned and fired the last flare into the darkness. The light exploded in a burst of red heat, forcing the hunters back again. But he knew it wouldn't last. The tunnel widened into a hollow chamber where the ceiling glittered with frozen icicles. Lyra guided them to a deep crack in the far wall, barely wide enough for them to squeeze through. "They won't follow past here," she said. "The ice will hide our heat." Ethan helped Cale through first, then turned to look back at the tunnel. The flickering glow of the flare was dying, and beyond it, he could see the faint outline of the hunters. They had stopped just outside the chamber, crouched low, watching, waiting. One tilted its head slowly, the motion almost human. Then it raised a long finger to the slit in its bone mask, a silent warning, a promise. They were letting them go for now, but the hunt wasn't over. Ethan followed Lyra into the crack, his breath loud in the stillness of the cave. Whatever came next, he knew they wouldn't have much time before the hunters tried again. The stand in the storm, the ice crack, was narrow and cold, but it led into another passage that dipped sharply downward. Ethan, Lyra, and Cale moved slowly, careful not to slip on the frozen floor. The air grew still and heavy, and the faint glow of the crystal veins faded until only the sound of their breathing filled the space when they finally emerged into a larger cavern. Ethan paused to take in the sight. The walls glittered with frozen mineral streaks, and a frozen stream ran down the center, Above, huge icicles hung like the teeth of some sleeping beast. The place was quiet. Too quiet, it didn't feel safe. Only hidden, Cale slumped against the wall. Exhausted, Lyra knelt beside him, giving him another glowing seed from her pouch. "They will come again," Cale murmured, his eyes half closed. "They never give." Up, Ethan rubbed his face. He knew Cale was right. If they just kept running, the hunters would corner them sooner or later. They had the advantage of the terrain, the cold, and experience in tracking prey through the snow. The only way out was to stop being prey. He stood and looked at Lyra. "If they're going to follow us, no matter where we go, then we make our stand," he said, her glowing eyes lifted toward him in the open. "They'll tear you apart," she warned. Ethan shook his head. "Not in the open here. In this cave, we turn it into a trap." Lyra studied him for a long moment. Her voice was doubtful, but curious. What kind of trap? Ethan scanned the cavern, his gaze landing on the massive icicles hanging above. "If we can get them to come in here, we use those," he said. Lyra's eyes followed his gesture. Her expression shifted, first surprise, then a small spark of hope. "You'd bring the ceiling down," she whispered. "Exactly," Ethan replied. "If we can hit them with enough force, even they won't walk away from it." They got to work. Ethan gathered loose chunks of ice and small stones from the cavern floor. Stacking them near the entrance, Lyra found a thin crack along the ceiling where the largest icicles were attached. They could weaken it just enough. The weight might do the rest. Cale, too weak to move much, gave advice in short bursts. "They follow heat," he said. "If you can make them think you're standing in the open, they'll rush straight at you." Lyra pulled a small, glowing crystal from her pouch and set it on the frozen floor near the entrance. "This will be the bait," she explained. "They will think it's us." Ethan tested his flare, gun empty. He had nothing left but his small survival knife and his hands. It would have to be enough. He began chipping carefully at the ice above. Just enough to make the ceiling unstable, but not enough to trigger it early. Each strike echoed through the cavern, making him wince. He could only hope the hunters couldn't hear it from outside. Hours passed in tense silence. The storm outside had picked up again, faintly audible through the rock walls. Lyra moved quietly, checking on Cale and then returning to the entrance. She would stand there for long moments, listening, her ears twitching at sounds Ethan couldn't pick up. "Then they're coming," she whispered. Her voice was calm, but her hands gripped her pouch tightly. Ethan froze, listening at first. All he heard was the faint sigh of wind through the tunnel. Then came the sound, slow, scraping footsteps against stone, and the low, drawn-out whistle that had haunted them since the slope. Ethan's pulse quickened. He moved into position. Crouched behind the stacked stones near the entrance, Lyra extinguished every light except for the single crystal lying in the open. The glow spilled across the ice like a soft beacon. It made the cavern look empty, vulnerable, inviting. The first hunter appeared in the tunnel. Its bone mask caught the faint light, eyes burning like embers under the slits. It crouched low, its claws scraping the floor. Another shape moved behind it, then another 3 in total. They entered. Slowly, their heads tilting, sniffing the air. Ethan held his breath, waiting. The hunter's focus fixed on the glowing crystal. Their steps quickened, claws clicking against the frozen floor as they closed the distance when they were directly beneath the cluster of icicles. Ethan shouted, "Now!" Lyra slammed a heavy rock into the crack they had weakened earlier. The sound was deafening sharp. Echoing crack followed by the deep rumble of ice shifting. The ceiling groaned, and then the largest icicles broke free. They fell like massive spears, shattering against the hunters with a roar. One was impaled instantly, pinned to the floor, its body twitching violently before going still. Another was struck across the back, its bone mask cracking. The third leaped aside, barely avoiding the falling ice, but its arm was sliced open, leaving a trail of dark, steaming blood on the floor. The survivors hissed, a sound so sharp it made Ethan's skin crawl. They backed toward the tunnel, dragging the injured one with them. Their glowing eyes never left Ethan's and Lyra's faces. It wasn't fear, was a promise they would be back. When the sound of their retreat faded, the cavern felt heavier. Ethan's muscles shook from the rush of adrenaline. Lyra let out a slow breath. "They won't stop," she said. "But now they know you can hurt them." Ethan glanced at Cale. The older alien's eyes were open now, watching him with something that looked like respect. "Humans," Cale said weakly, "are stubborn creatures." Ethan smiled faintly. "You have no idea," he replied, but inside he knew the truth. They'd only bought themselves time. The real test would come when the hunters returned. Dawn and departure. The night was long. Long enough that Ethan lost track of the hours after the ice trap had fallen. Silence returned to the cavern, but it was the kind of silence that felt watched. Every drip of melting ice, every shift of Cale's breathing, every faint creak from the walls made Ethan's hand twitch toward his knife. They took turns resting. Though rest was generous, Lyra curled beside her brother, keeping a hand on him as if afraid he might vanish if she let go. Ethan sat by the narrow crack in the ice, staring into the faint glow from the tunnel beyond. His thoughts circled the same truth over and over. They couldn't stay here. By the time a thin, cold light began filtering down from some unseen opening above, Cale was sitting upright. The seeds Lyra had been giving him had brought color back. To his skin, he still looked weak, but there was strength in his voice now. "We move at first light," he said. Ethan nodded. "We'll make for human territory." Cale gave a faint smile. "If we can reach the ridge by midday, we'll see your towers." Lyra stood and tightened the straps on the small satchel she carried. Her voice was calm, but her eyes stayed on the tunnel. "They'll try again before we leave the valley." Ethan expected the hunters to strike the moment they stepped out. Instead, the morning felt almost unnervingly empty. The snow outside was deep but undisturbed, the world painted in shades of white and silver. No fresh tracks, no sound, nothing but the cold. They moved quickly on, supporting Cale, Lyra scouting ahead. The climb out of the rocky slope was brutal, but the air felt sharper here, fresher. Each step took them higher, toward the faint line of the horizon, where Cale had said human towers would be. Halfway across the open snowfield, Lyra froze. Ethan saw it too. Far behind them, dark shapes had emerged from the tree line. 3, maybe 4 hunters. Their pale forms melting in and out of the drifting snow. They weren't running yet, just keeping pace, their heads tilted, watching. "They're driving us forward," Cale muttered, "herding us into the open." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Then we keep moving until we're out of their range." They pushed on, their breaths puffing white in the frigid air every so often. Ethan glanced back and saw the shapes following, never closing the gap, but never falling behind. It was a game to them, a slow chase meant to wear down their prey. When the ridge finally came into view, Ethan felt his chest tighten, not with fear, but hope. Thin metal spires rose above the snow line, glinting faintly in the pale light. Human communication towers. If they could reach them, they could signal for pickup. But the hunters must have sensed it too. The moment the towers came into sight, the slow stalking stopped. The figures in the snow broke into a sprint, moving with terrifying speed. Lyra's sharp voice cut through the wind. "They're coming." Ethan didn't think he acted. "Go," he shouted, shoving Cale forward and drawing his knife. He knew he couldn't fight them head-on, but he could slow them down. The snow crunched behind him, closer now. Too close. He turned just as the first hunter lunged, its claws sweeping toward him. Ethan dropped low. Slashing upward with the blade, the knife glanced off its bone mask, carving a deep line across it. The creature hissed, recoiling. The second hunter veered to the side, trying to circle him. But a sharp whistle from Lyra echoed back she had found higher ground. Standing on a snowdrift with a flare she'd taken from Ethan's pack, she lit it and waved it wildly. The red smoke cutting through the white. The hunters slowed, wary of the sudden light. Ethan didn't waste the chance. He turned and ran, catching up to Cale just as Lyra dropped back down beside them. The ridge was close now, so close Ethan could see the faint blinking light of a beacon at its base. A deep, low hum rose from beyond the ridge. Ethan's heart leapt human engines. They crested the ridge to see a small rescue craft sitting in the snow, its side door open. Two armed soldiers waved them forward. Shouting for them to hurry, the three of them stumbled the last few meters, collapsing into the ship's cabin as the engines roared to life. Ethan turned just in time to see the hunters reach the ridge, their bone masks glaring in the rising snow. One tilted its head, holding Ethan's gaze even as the craft lifted off. No roar, no screams, just that silent, unbroken stare. A promise that the hunt was not over as the ship climbed higher, the white world below shrinking into the distance. Lyra leaned against Ethan's arm. Her voice was soft, almost lost under the engine's hum. Snow was cold, but you made it warm. Ethan glanced at her, then at Cale, who gave him a quiet nod of thanks. He smiled faintly. "You're safe now," he said, though a part of him wasn't sure, because far below, in the endless snow, the hunters would wait. And if fate ever brought him back to this frozen planet, they'd be waiting for him too.